well, how can I actually keep that ownership? How can I make sure that I'm credited for this and not just like, oh, there's a JPEG that's linked to this transaction that I made first? That, as cool as that is, it doesn't really give you much protection in reality. How can you monetize that? How can you actually protect the rights for what it's putting out? Like whether it owns it or the founder, the creators of it own its IP that it's creating and putting out on a daily basis. Like how does that work? Is it just another NFT being minted on Story now, or like how does that work? How am I supposed to even know that I need to enforce it, much less think about how to enforce it, where you're already coming up with some potential solutions to this problem? So I guess let's kick it off. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your background? Like I said, I did a little bit of research, but I would love to hear it from you because you have a very impressive background. So I want to hear your.
Now I'm afraid I won't live up to what the AI created.
AI is good at fluffing us up. It makes us feel really good about ourselves.
You can let me know if I live up to the hype after I'm done. But
let's do it.
I have a bit of a peculiar upbringing, both in terms of like growing up as well as professionally. So growing up, I'm actually Italian. I am 100% born in Italy, Italian parents.
Nice.
But I grew up around the world, so including the US, hence my accent.
I was going to say, you have very like Americanized accent.
So I don't sound like this, right?
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I lived in France, I lived in the US, I lived in the UK, I lived in China, I lived in Luxembourg, I lived in Germany, I lived in Canada. So I've been all over. And my professional background is also a little bit like this because I studied finance. I studied finance and economics. But as I was studying, I was working as a developer, kind of like a startup do-it-all, right? Like that's the thing in startups. Like I was one of the co-founders of a IT consultancy, and we were building web apps. We were doing consultancy work. So I kind of dipped my feet into a lot of different tech stacks.
A little bit of everything.
And so I have this like hybrid business / dev background. And that's why I could never really find my place, honestly, in the business world, especially in the enterprise world, because once I decided to leave the startup I co-founded, which is still going, but it was going in a direction that I wasn't really excited for. Like I wanted to stay a small consultancy, and I wanted to be more like on, like the classic startup of like, okay, let's build something and scale it to millions of users. And before I wanted to do that, I was like, okay, let's work for the biggest company in the world and see how they do it, right? And so that's why I went to Amazon, and I was planning on staying there like a year or two, and ended up being 7 years, which I still to this day don't know how quickly they whizzed by. And the thing about Amazon is it's like its own universe, its own world, where you start in one team, and each team is its own company, right? So the culture is different. What you're working on is completely different. Like someone could be working in retail, someone could be working on servers, someone could be working on, conversational AI, which is what I was working on Amazon Alexa. And so it really feels like changing companies when you change internally. And over those 7 years, I got promoted a couple of times. I changed teams, I changed countries. So it really did feel like changing companies, right? And that's probably why I stayed so long at Amazon. But then after a while, I was like, okay, I'm either staying here my whole life, like in the good old days where people would stay at the same company for like 40, 50 years, like my dad did. Or I try to change and see what's up. And in the tail end of my career at Amazon, I created a website called The Coin Perspective, which got me into the crypto world, that helped people compare market caps of coins to see like price potential, circulating supply, total supply. You can like toggle things. You can play with the sliders to see how it would impact price based on, the way that market and supply worked. And this was back in 2021 when everyone was like desperately trying to throw money at anything that moved, right?
Yeah.
And
DeFi summer.
Yes. And, that's what got me in. And I was still skeptical of the space, obviously. Like I feel everyone needs to have a healthy dose of skepticism when it comes to Web3 because of just the signal to noise ratio is not always the best. Sorry, just plugging in my computer. But at that time, coincidentally, Dapper Labs reached out, which, they had created more or less the only two products at the time that actually reached the mainstream. And those two products were CryptoKitties and NBA Top Shot. Like, so hundreds of thousands of people were introduced to NFTs through NBA Top Shot. And so I was like, okay, I'm skeptical of Web3, but if there's one way to learn about something is to dive into it. And Dapper Labs wanted me to kind of lead the DevRel for, Dapper Labs and Flow. And I was like, okay, Flow is the blockchain of Dapper Labs. And I was like, okay, let's try this. And so I made the leap. I joined Flow for a couple years. And obviously, it was like right when the bear market started. So I was like in the trenches for all of the bear market.
That's when I got professionally into Web3 too. I worked for one. Yeah, I worked at Tron at that time. So
okay.
Cool.
Exactly. So the daily excitement of working on stuff when the whole world has forgotten about crypto is like questioning you every day. Like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
And so a couple years later, the founders of Story reached out, and I had a conversation with them. And without realizing, a lot of my career has all been about IP, because at Dapper Labs, the main products were all IP, right? Like Disney, NBA, UFC, even CryptoKitties became an IP, right? Yep. When I was at Amazon, Alexa is obviously an IP, but I was also working on Kindle before that, which is like all working with publishers and bringing their books on Kindle. And so the fact that they were trying to modernize and revolutionize how IP works and do what Bitcoin did for money, but do it for IP, that was what got me really interested. And then that was 2 years ago, and now I'm here. So it's been a long ride. And I started at Story as kind of like leading, again, the DevRel set up the whole function, but I got really involved on the product side. And if you want, we can dive into some of the product initiatives that I'm particularly excited about at Story. But recently, as you might have seen in the fluffed up AI version of me, I was entrusted with kind of leading the foundation,
Mr. President.
Which is a big role, and I'm very honored and humbled to have been appointed to, and will do my best to steward the foundation.
I gotta say, that's a hell of a title to be appointed president of the foundation. Like, that's a big responsibility, but it's also like big props, right? Like, you're getting recognition for what you've brought to the team, what you've brought to the ecosystem, and like that must feel great. It's not a small thing.
No. I'm absolutely honored. Definitely don't take it for granted. And
it's probably why you got it, to be honest, right? Like, it has a lot more to do with your attitude and what you bring, and like the fact that you are humble about it, and you have obviously an amazing background. So like, I got to give a little shout out to Amazon, because I feel like I've met so many people. Our co-founders actually started at Amazon.
Oh, wow.
I've met so many people that have history or experience at Amazon.
Yeah.
One of my good friends that helped me build one of my AI agent products that we were messing around with last year. He still works at Amazon high level. And so like, it's really cool to see so many people coming from that like centralized background of AWS, of different like products and different teams at Amazon, and kind of shifting into blockchain, getting that introduction. And a lot of people also make those connections of like, even working with AI, automating processes, working with, like you said, with IP.
Yeah.
There's just so many pieces at Amazon, and like we're an infrastructure provider, right? Like, we run nodes. We put, servers out all over the world. We're one of the few that does physical bare metal servers, as opposed to just using Amazon for our nodes. Which, I mean, it gives
Amazon
us
wants crypto.
Dude, we saw it just a couple days ago, right? Like April 15th, there was some downtime. That's not the first time we've seen it. And like, it's one of the problems with using a centralized service. It's sometimes it's cheaper, it's fairly reliable, it's easily scalable. So there's a lot of benefits to it. But that's why like Anchor kind of took a different route of, we've seen how Amazon operates. Instead of just using Amazon, we're going to follow that mindset of like, hey, we can distribute our own hardware into data centers all over the world and create basically our own like cloud service. But it's less about having control over it, more about having that distribution, making sure it's resilient, and like if
Yeah,
anything
100%.
changes, yeah, regulation wise, if power goes out or anything happens in any one of the data centers that we run servers in, we've got like 100 more, and we can reroute and we can make
Right.
sure everything stays up and running at all times, which is really important. But like we got a lot of those lessons from Amazon. So like as much as Amazon, I don't know how they feel about blockchain. Obviously, it's a business, so they're gonna find the opportunity. But it like we've learned a lot, and that those lessons have brought us to where we are today, where we support over 80 blockchains. Like we're one of the core providers in many of the
Yeah,
ecosystems.
you're one of the biggest, right?
Yeah, I want to say we support more blockchains than any other and any competitor of ours. I'm like 99% sure that that's true, but like
That's
just
that's more
feel free to
accurate
fact
than
check me.
AI is. We can just stamp it as true.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah,
Um,
it's really cool to see that like a lot of people from a very similar background have found a space in Web3 and
yeah,
found a way to bring their knowledge and their skills over to this space.
yeah, and you know what? Our CTO is from Amazon. I believe we have one or two other team members that are from Amazon as well, and and I think these big companies, it's like a double-edged sword, right? A lot of people working at these big companies may not be a good fit for startups, but people yearning for that startup culture that have had the rigor and training, that kind of boot camp at a big company, and knows, for example, Amazon has a strong document culture, has a strong like kind of reporting process. They can benefit and apply those learnings to a more unstructured startup vibe. Whereas if people start at a startup, it's harder to create those mental structures
Like
without someone having them into you.
yeah, I feel like you really gotta have a 50-50 like internally of that like corporate structure of like kind of having processes and SOPs and doing things the right way.
Yeah.
But you also have to be a degen, right? Like being a startup founder or even having that startup culture mindset
Right.
is very similar to like being a degen. You just kind of have to go where the action is, and you got to find everything that needs to get done, and just find a way to do it. And that's not necessarily the learning you get from like a super corporate structure. So that's one thing that really interested me about your background too, having that dual mindset of like economics and like understanding the business side of a startup, and then being on the dev side and actually being creative and having that engineering mindset of how can I build something is like, it's rare to find a double threat that has like both sides. It's usually one or the other. You got to find the co-founder to like find that other half. And you kind of hit both of those, which is, I mean, that's really cool. And I can see how you've made it to where you are today with that mindset and that experience behind you. Dude, that's okay. Awesome. So I don't think you just lived up to it. I think you expanded on how impressed I am with your background. Like no glazing. It's really cool to talk to people that have that experience and are super humble about it. So, dude, sick. Okay. Now we're just going to jump into Story. Now you're at Story. You have experience with IP. You have experience with the dev side of things. You have the startup experience. So when you came to Story, like obviously with Flow, you said NBA Top Shot, CryptoKitties. Like there's already that background of IP. You started during like the NFT boom, which that was kind of the idea of NFTs, right? That entire standard was built to kind of put your IP on chain, put your images and your content and like put it on chain for life. We still needed a lot to happen after that standardization of ERC 720. There's like, well, how can I actually keep that ownership? How can I make sure that I'm credited for this and not just like, oh, there's a JPEG that's linked to this transaction that I made first. That, as cool as that is, it doesn't really give you much protection in reality.
So
how does Story address that?
I feel like NFTs, we both know what they represent, right? It's not the image, but it's actually being able to represent something as being unique, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this thing is different from anything else, even if it's exactly the same as something else. And obviously that was applied to JPEGs, and the world knows NFTs as JPEGs that you can copy and paste and therefore are worthless. That's what a lot of people think, but they're missing the whole point. Like they're missing the whole point of what NFT is. Like it allows for scarcity and ownership of something that's digital alone, just an NFT. It creates digital scarcity. what Story is doing is we actually use the NFT as a concept to represent an IP asset, but there's obviously a lot more around it. So when you register an IP asset on Story, and hopefully I can get a little technical in this podcast,
Yeah, please.
And you can let me know, how deep I should go or stop at. But when you register an IP on Story, what happens if it's already an NFT, meaning it's an on-chain IP? Then a token-bound IP account is associated to that NFT, and that's what regulates things like royalties, like license terms that you can set, like royalty tokens that entitle you to the revenue that IP accrues over time, the disputes. All of the brains of Story are kind of like encapsulated in the IP account that is token-bound to the NFT. If a real-world IP or some other IP is not already on chain, what happens is an NFT gets minted to represent that IP, right? Because again, a non-fungible token, it does exactly that. It represents something that is unique, regardless of whether it's on chain or not, so that we have that pointer to that thing. And then the same thing happens. The token bound account
is tracking. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So really the NFT is kind of like a representation of the IP. And then the brains of Story is within the IP account that is token bound to the NFT, so that when you transfer that IP to someone else, all of that is transferred as well, right? So we're using a lot of the same primitives that Web3 knows very well, which is ERC 721s, ERC 6551, right? Like the royalty tokens that you that you own as the IP owner, or that the owners have that entitle you to the royalty revenue, are ERC 20s. So very much all the same primitives that we're used to. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel there, but what makes Story special is not that we are introducing ERC
new standards,
some random number just to be different, but we are our core contribution is actually on the licensing side, which is when you register an IP, sure, you have it as a pointer, as an NFT, that's great, but that would be kind of like what we already have. What you can do now is you can set terms. We have a programmable license. So you can set, we created with some of the leading law firms a standard license for copyright content so without a lawyer, you can go and set your terms dynamically, and those terms are obviously represented as parameters on chain, so you can program smart contracts around those terms. And what's cool is it's a bit like on-ramping and off-ramping law, because when you create,
you're legally protected. Like this is
it rasterizes to a real license that you can enforce. And when someone mints a license to use your IP, they are actually creating a license, to the terms that you set out, and that is a legal contract. So that's what's really special about Story is it's not, because other attempts in the past at creating IP contracts on chain were very much naive implementations of, let's just take this contract text and copy and paste it into an on-chain contract, and everyone signs it and calls it a day. But like, it's very, I don't know, it's not dynamic at all. You can't really do anything with it. It doesn't introduce any way for people to access it or reuse it or write code around it, right? Because you can't query that contract with any new terms, or hey, what's the revenue share of this contract, right? With Story, all of those terms are like code parameters that you can query. You can say, okay, give me all the IPs from this account that have a revenue share less than 10%, right? So for example, that's just a random example, but yeah, I'll stop here because I know that I've been talking a lot, and
no, that's really interesting that you broke it down that way, because that was going to be one of my main questions, and it's a question I've had for a while, right? Like I've seen a lot of different ways that people have tried to protect IP on chain, and none of them have really been successful. And one of my good friends, the co-founder of Cerebro, was like working with you guys with Story, and that was always my question. I was like, the concept is really cool. Cerebro had like great mind share, but I was like, how does Story actually help you protect your IP? Cerebro's out there creating music, it's posting, like it's getting that attention. but like how can you monetize that? How can you actually protect the rights for what it's putting out? Like whether it owns it or the founder, the creators of it own its IP that it's creating and putting out on a daily basis. Like how does that work? Is it just another NFT
So
being minted on Story now, or like how does that work?
yeah, it's funny because one of Cerebro's songs are registered on Story.
Nice.
So the song "Lust" by Cerebro, it might play. So apologies if you hear some audio, but can I link this to you and you can maybe take a look? Do we have a chat here? Yes, we do. Let me. Actually, I can go to the live stream chat. Okay, can you see the live stream chat? So we have a portal, right, where obviously applications can integrate with Story, and yeah, maybe it's not the most shareable short URL, but you can maybe add it to the description.
Yeah,
but from this page, right, like Cerebro has registered their its song on. That's a philosophical question that we're not going to get into.
That's today. We don't have time for that today.
Yes. That's an hour podcast on its own. And whether it's a human or whether it's an AI agent, anyone can register their IP more or less as easily as uploading an image to social media. And once you go through the flow, and I highly encourage you to try after this podcast, but like go on portal and maybe take an image that you have created or a song that you've created, and try to register it. You'll see how easy it is. Every step is very straightforward. You can just set your metadata. You can choose from pre-configured licenses if you want, like templates, or you can configure your own, but you don't have to like write any legal text. You can just go and choose, different parameters, like, okay, whether do you want this license to be valid? What's the revenue share that you want? Do you want commercial use or not? All things that are, easy to understand to normal people, not lawyers.
Yeah.
And then once you register it, the beauty of it is anyone else that finds it on the portal can legally license it without you having to like get into a call and have a conversation and loop in lawyers and
you've already set your terms. You decide whether you
proactively set your terms up front. And now anyone can take those terms and run with them.
Dude, I'm sorry, in my head, and I don't like to make this comparison, but it's basically sounding like NFTs on OpenSea in 2021, where you're like, I can just put my image here, I can set the royalties, and like I can mint it, but you've made that 10 times more functional in terms of like actually legally enforceable and dynamic changes.
And, exactly. And royalties on OpenSea, like that was just related to like buying and selling that NFT, right? Which is a very like, I'm not going to say short-sighted, but very limited use case, which is just buying and selling of that same thing. Whereas here, you can set the terms of, hey, like if you created a cool song and I use it in a movie, then I know what your terms are, and I can pay you a portion of revenue or whatever, right? Or if I can pay up front to have a license and not have to give you any revenue, depending on what terms you choose. And so it's very much, a whole new space. And if you think about the world of IP, it's estimated it's worth several trillions of dollars, right? IP in the world, like intangible assets, are worth over $60 trillion.
Jeez,
that's like 10 times, 30 times, depending on whether we're in a bull market or not. 30 to 60 times the value of crypto today, as a whole, right? And so it's a massive market, and so far it hasn't really been made accessible. Only the top companies with the top legal firms have access to the top IP. And it's kind of purposely made in this opaque structure so that, it's hard to access. But what if we could completely transform that, and anything that gets created is now an IP, and anyone that wants to use it knows exactly what terms they want. So when you create a small fragment that could become viral, when it does, people know exactly what your terms are to use it, without you having to proactively or reactively, after it's viral, try to grasp at ways to make enough of it, right?
Yeah, trying to rein it in.
Yes.
Look, I guess so. My question would be, you've already answered the first part, which I've thought about for a long time, is like, how can you make legally enforceable protections on IP that's minted? So you've already answered that question. That's
Yeah.
basically the core of what Story is, of what the protocol allows you to do.
Yes.
So the second question, and you kind of touched on it, right? Like so far, it's really just been the biggest players with the most money that have access to the top IP. But a big part of that is also being able to enforce it. So they have the money to pay lawyers to be able to enforce it and take people to court. And sometimes you can just outpay lawyers to make sure, like, to make things go away because people can't afford to fight it. So in that sense, and if there isn't an answer to this, I completely understand that because everybody has their role to play. So you've already got the programmable IP, you've got like kind of the legal framework for how to make this enforceable. Is there any recommendation or any ideas on how people can actually go about enforcing that?
100%. You know, and that's a great question, and a question that everyone will have, right? I think there's a couple answers to it, and I agree with you that, you know, there's more. It requires more than just Story to have a perfect, ideal outcome, but I think at Story we're also making a lot of progress on this angle as well. So, like, number one is, a lot of content today is not registered at all. And therefore, there are no terms associated to it, and people don't know what the terms are. And so they default to copying it and stealing it because there's no way to
memeing.
It's people are like, exactly. It's kind of like the Napster moment where it was easier to download something on Napster than it was to buy it at the physical store, right? But now with Netflix, with Spotify, you're kind of like, it's easier to just do things legally. So if we can lower the barrier to doing things legally and licensing things the way that the artist intended, and make it as easy as copying and pasting the image, like, why not do it the right way, right? Why not do it so that it's win-win and you don't have to worry about takedowns and cease and desists. And so, like, that's already step one. Step two is there's obviously a layer of defensibility, of enforcement, of detection. And at Story, we built the Story Attestation Service. And this is something that I was very involved in as well on the product side, which is, given that we're a decentralized network, how do we create how can we help add a way to validate IP without being a centralized authority, right? And our answer to that, and obviously it's still a work in progress, but we already have a V0 out, is the Story Attestation Service, which is a collection of independent service providers that are not Story, that process the IP that's being registered and attest to whether, for example, it's infringing or to whether, and we could add different layers to these attestations. So infringement is the one that's already live. And if you register a song on the portal and you attach commercial terms to it, it will be processed by the leading music detection library in the world. That's a Web2 company. And it will attest to whether it's infringing or not, right? Right. And that's one layer, but you could have other layers like, okay, really what is the identity of the author of this IP? Can we attest to whether they are actually them, right? Okay. Or provenance, like, where was this IP created? Was it created in a Photoshop environment where you kind of can control the tools at the artist's disposal and you can certify whether it's used AI or not? Or is there no provenance, so you don't really know where it's coming from, right? And so there's a lot of layers that we can explore that are probably not really available today because they span multiple domains and span multiple sources of information. But if we can kind of act as the hub where all of these different sources of information can be aggregated around the IP asset, it's going to be actually much more enforceable and much more indicative of, like, okay, this is what the IP is, this is who registered it, this is where it came from, this is who created it, and maybe it ties in via Oracle networks in the future to different sources of information, like, copyright law has an expiration date after the original author's death, right? So all of these things are signals that we can collect and in a decentralized way, like, aggregate to the IP, and I think that makes it even more powerful than an IP that's simply registered in a local government, right? And so I'm not saying that Story solves every problem, but we need we need to work on the basics first to then work on higher order problems. But the good news is, if you register something on Story today, you can still enforce it. That license, that contract, you can still enforce it in a court of law, because of the fact that the PIL, the programmable IP license, was created with that in mind. And last thing I'll say, I know I've been blabbering a long time, but the last thing I'll say is we also have a whole dispute module that you can, in a decentralized way, dispute IP that's on Story, and where the whole protocol is made in a modular way, so you can swap in and out different dispute resolution processes. We'll support different types of licenses in the future as well. So like the whole protocol is meant to be expanded on. And as use cases come up, like we didn't want to be the type of company that tries to come up with the perfect product before launching it, because that's the best way to make a bad product, right? We wanted to launch right away, get real user feedback, get real user traction, get real users to try the protocol, to see what is actually needed, and then continue to evolve the protocol with them, because the beauty of a decentralized network is that everyone can participate.
Dude, that was a very comprehensive answer. And like, I genuinely, I like the fact that you don't not only do you not beat around the bush, you dive deep into that's why I didn't even interrupt you. I was like, I want to let this man finish. And like, very comprehensive response, right? And it's part of the bigger question of whether it's enforceable, how you enforce it is one part of it, but even being able to track and find, that was another kind of one of those basic questions of okay, sure, I registered it, but now if somebody else somewhere on the other side of the world is using it in something, I'll never know. So how am I supposed to even know that I need to enforce it, much less think about how to enforce it, where you're already coming up with some potential solutions to this problem? So you mentioned for music, there's already a solution where they can, at least it's a Web 2 solution, and it's doing basically the work for you in terms of tracking and making sure that your IP is being protected, or if it's being used somewhere, you can find out without having to do all that manual legwork yourself. And then that moves into disputes. And one point that you made, which really kind of was the explosion for me, was that it's like the Napster moment was, I've never really thought about it that way, because right now, if it's easier to steal than it is to do things legally or the right way, or whatever the case is, then that's what you're going to do. It's not that everybody's necessarily trying to be a horrible person and steal, but if I don't know how I'm supposed to get credit for this, I'll just copy and paste it, dude. Maybe I'll give a credit to this person on the post, but there's no way for me to really give that person what they deserve for creating that content right now. And so it's not even necessarily coming from a negative place. It's
no, absolutely not. It's just human nature, humans will always take the path of least resistance, and there's nothing wrong with that. It would be naive of us to think that they would, not. And the other part of this, of this is obviously, let's be very pragmatic and accept the fact that not everyone is going to be an honest actor, but they're always the ones that will not want, the ones that continue to stream things illegally today, the ones that continue to pirate content today, are not the type of people that will magically decide to do things differently, right? If it suddenly becomes easier, and that's not what we need to optimize for. We need to optimize for making things easy, so that the majority of people, the ones that are actually creating value, not just the ones that are consuming, the ones that are actually keen on creating new content and being able to monetize it and being able to expand on existing IP without fear of that IP being taken down or flagged, lost, or whatever. They can do that easily. One concrete example is that famous Drake song that came out a couple years ago that was created with AI, right? I don't know if you remember, but there was a song called "Heart on My Sleeve" by someone called Ghostwriter, and they created a song, they produced a song, they made the instrumental, they sung the voice, and then they used AI to transform the voice into Drake, and it went viral. It got millions and millions of streams. And what did Drake do? What did his label do? They just completely took it down, and no one won, right? It was a lose-lose outcome, because and Grimes quote tweeted the news article about that, and said, anyone that wants to use my voice can do so. Just give me 50%, right? And now with Story, that type of call to action is not just a tweet, but it can actually be the real thing. You can register your voice on Story and say, hey, these are the terms. It's 50% revenue stream. 50% revenue share. And now anyone can go and license it. And like, they're working on their home computer. They're working on, Ableton or a Logic Pro. And they came up with the perfect instrumental. And now it's time to find a good vocal. And they're like, Grimes would really like smash this song. Now they can go to the IP portal, license that voice in one click, and use Grimes's voice. So like, that's the type of use case that we're optimizing for, not trying to magically, create walls around IP, because it's impossible to stop bad behavior if they're really intentional on being bad.
Yeah, but that can't be your base assumption going out, is like, exactly, we're trying to stop the bad people from doing the bad things. We're just trying to make it easier for the creators to put some protections around their creations and to be able to monetize it and enforce these protections. And for the most part, like you said, the general public doesn't want to actively steal things. Like, I want to be able to give credit for the things that I'm consuming or the things that I'm reusing or using for inspiration. It's just not always easy to do that. And that, like, I feel like that's a much bigger portion of users.
It's a vast majority. Vast majority. Yeah. And I think even like, if we extrapolate this, and I'm sorry if I'm like, stretching this topic a bit longer than you intended to, but if we extrapolate the same topic to AI, right, and like Studio Ghibli and that recent craze of everyone trying to Ghiblify their
image generation,
their whole family photos and past existence, and like, that is the same exact problem. And actually, I was listening to Sam Altman's TED interview that came out a couple of days ago around, and he was asked the same question, like, do you think creators should earn something when someone asks to generate something in the exact or very similar style of an existing artist? And he definitely said, like, yes, I think there should be a way to reward artists. So I think there's, going back to your point, like, there are good intentions. I think what's missing is the infrastructure to make it happen. And I think Story is going to be one core part of that infrastructure, right? So that Story is at the right place at the right time for this. And we're already working with Stability AI. We're happy to work with any other AI company, whether it's OpenAI, whether it's XAI, whatever, to help them achieve this. But ideally, any form of content that gets ingested into a model should be accounted for and attributed in some way. Mm-hmm. And when that model generates content, it should have a heat map of, this area of my training data was most used for this output, right? And most of that is owned by entity X.
Yeah.
And these people that are generating content are paying me $20 a month to generate this content. They did, 200 prompts in the course of the month, and 5 of them were for content. So I'm going to divvy up a bit like Spotify does. I'm going to divvy up the plays and pay back, this creator in some way, right? Like, that has to be the case. It has to happen. Otherwise, we're not going to live in a sustainable content creator and AI world, because no one's going to be incentivized to create anything if they know that AI is just going to scoop it up and now be perfect representation, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have already, many lawsuits about like how they've trained their data, how people are utilizing the data.
Exactly.
And like, I'm really glad that you brought that up. In my head, I'm picturing like the Bubble Maps version of training data that's being used to generate an output.
Yeah.
And like, even if it could go both ways, from the providers like OpenAI or Anthropic, that's like, I'm getting $20 a month or $200 a month from this enterprise company. This is what they're using it for. This is the training data that was used. I can now compensate this person with a small share of that revenue because we're utilizing their data for this. Or even on the other end of like, hey, you want to produce like a Studio Ghibli type of image. We have a specialized model that's just trained on this. And like, it's going to cost you this many tokens instead of this many tokens. I'm paying like 3 cents instead of 2 cents. but I know that part of that, it's like the tipping model, right? Like I know that part of that is going directly to the studio that created this style and this content and what I'm using to be able to generate the stuff that I want to generate. And like I would have absolutely no problem with paying an extra few cents here and there to make sure that people are being properly incentivized and being paid for their hard work that went into giving me the ability to create what I wanted to create.
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think, for sure. Like ideally, I think ideally it should be part of the money you already spent.
Already
right?
paying. Yeah.
If you're giving OpenAI $20 a month, then a part of that I feel should be reserved for the shoulders of all the giants that the model is standing on, right? Big or small giants, but everyone contribute. Like all of humanity made GPT possible, if you think about it, right? And right now it's just free riding. And I know that there's good intentions. Now I think the next few years are going to be critical in turning those good intentions into actual tangible outcomes.
Nice. I definitely agree, and I sure hope so. It's been great to see, the potential that's been created by AI and these generative AI models, now reasoning models. Like you can create entire products, like much less, like it started with a little bit of written content and then some images. Now you can create full videos and movies and all types of crazy products using this. And I feel like the back end of that, of the training data that's being used and of all the different combinations of products on the back end that make these end results possible, are going to have to figure out a way to make that economic model a little bit more fair than it is today from the people that are creating the stuff, or the people that have created the data that's used to train these models. Like from both ends, it's going to take some time. This is with any innovation, a few usually reap the rewards, reap the benefits. But over time, at least with this new generation, I hope that changes and it becomes a little bit more fair and equitable across the board to the people that had a part to play in this, whether it was active or a passive part. There's a lot of people that played, like you said, basically in the entirety of humanity has played a part in making this possible. And it's going to be really interesting to see the progression of that over the next few years, and how story plays a part in that. So I guess I'm going to jump into the last part of this, right? Like future vision. AI is a big hot topic. It has been for the past year, 2 years at this point. I know in blockchain, that narrative has maybe dropped away a little bit, but it still has a really big part to play in the things that are being built in blockchain and the 100%. Things that are being tokenized and monetized. And so I'll let you take it away with however you want to describe what you see the future vision. I personally am really interested to see how AI, like AI agents and AI creations are really being utilized through story, and how they're being, how like programmable IP works with AI creation. But yeah, in your own like vision, what do you see changing in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of how story operates with IP?
Wow, that's a big question. I love how 5 to 10 years is basically like, quantum leap in blockchain years
at this point. Yeah.
I always think about the Bill Gates quote, people underestimate the change that can happen people overestimate the change that can happen in 2 years and underestimate the change that can happen in 10 years, I believe, 20.
Yeah.
The point is, things take time to change, but not a bit longer than we expect, but a lot of change can happen in not as much time as we think. And I believe that with story, we really are at the right place at the right time, right? We are in the basically climax of the gold rush of our generation, which is data. And so far AI companies have trained on a lot of data, and now it's a time of, okay, now what, right? And we kind of already talked about this, so like I feel like I'm a little repeating myself, but I think it's worth repeating a little bit of what I said earlier, which is we need to come up. What's great about crypto is it can turn anything into a market, right? And we need to apply a market to data so that it coexists with these models that become the front end to the internet. Like now people can just go to these models and ask for anything. And really, they've kind of captured all of the distribution, right? And so, as in typical distribution channel fashion, distribution channels end up having, the power, but like Google had in the last 20 years, and new economic models come out of that distribution power, right? For Google, it was ads, but the core consistency, the consistent thing throughout all distribution channels is there is a mechanism to give back, right? And so what YouTube with content creators, or radio with royalty rights. Royalty licensing fees to playing music. There's always a way to give back, and now AI models have to come up with a new unexplored territory of how do we give back with something that is so all-encompassing. And going back to your question around like story in 5 to 10 years, I truly believe in that. This is what we're building towards, which is story should be part of that new model, right?
Solution
is going to be part of that new model where everything that gets used for training is accounted for, is attributed, is linked in some way, whether it's a original, whether it's a derivative, whether it's a derivative of a derivative. All of that is put in a massive graph, and that's used for training. And when the model outputs anything, it has
heat map
synapses back to all of the content that has been accounted for in the degree that it was used to generate that content. And based on all of that, revenue and will flow back to these creators. That is the only way. That is actually the only way that we can make this work, because otherwise we end up in a tragedy of the commons where all of the grass has been eaten and there's no more grass growing because, someone forgot that, we kind of need seeds to continue to be planted. Otherwise the grasses, and we all starve to death. Right. And so I think AI companies are waking up to that now. Studio Ghibli was a very viral moment, but it was a very big wake-up call for a lot of people.
Yep.
And I think the next 2 to 3 years will be critical around that. And then for story as a whole, beyond AI, ideally in 10 years, I want to see us working closely with every government in the world and making sure that there's a connection between the IP that's in those opaque and hard to read and work with government databases and story. We can be that programmable layer on top of all of that IP. Obviously, being a core part of the AI infrastructure and bringing, the world's IP on chain and making it liquid and doing what Bitcoin did for money for IP.
Dude, that's a massive vision. I respect it, and I can definitely see that in the way that you guys have been moving so far. I can definitely see that being a very likely part of your future. I don't know how it's going to happen. I'm envisioning a ton of data, like 10x the amount of data we have today that goes into tracking all of like what you mentioned, of all of the training data and trying to figure out what is being generated by who and everything that's being used in that process of generation, being able to track that, being able to share that data and being able to actually act on it. Like we were already 100x the amount of data that the internet was using a couple of years ago, just with this new AI tooling that's been added in. Like it's gone haywire. And even like regular tools that used to be available 24/7, ChatGPT, Claude, are like constantly going down just because the demand is so high. Yeah. And so adding more to that operational layer on the back end, I can imagine that's going to be a very large undertaking. It's going to be a ton of data, a ton of resources that go into this. But on the flip side of that, we also see a much, much, much more fair and equitable future for the creators, for all of the creatives, and developers, creators, everybody whose work goes into this process. Hopefully will actually see a benefit from that and be able to feel more protected and more freedom to create, as opposed to always trying to watch their own back and how their work is being used and how they're maybe losing out on the other side of that. So That's really exciting, man. And genuinely, I appreciate the way you break things down. It was like you go very in depth, and like you're very humble about how you explain it, but it's very useful, it's very powerful. And especially for people like me that like have always been kind of creative, but like I don't know what the outlet is. I don't know how to protect myself if I'm putting stuff out there and maybe it actually does well for once. Like,
Right.
how am I supposed to be able to monetize that and protect the future of what comes out of that? It seems like Story makes it really, really easy. It's like the 2021 version of minting an NFT is now legally being able to protect your creations and the work that you're putting out there, and making that enforceable, which is, I mean, that's night and day. And so if you've been able to do that in the past 3 or 4 years, I can only imagine what comes in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So
And now you know exactly what to do when you create some new. Are you an artist or are you a musician? What's your outlet?
I like to write a lot.
Okay.
I'm also like, I'm not a dev officially. Like I'm one of those, I'm vibe coder.
Right. Butter.
But I started doing this last year and started using Claude in different ways. I started with smart contracts, like copy pasting in 2020, 2019 from Etherscan,
Yeah.
and started like copy pasting into Remix and deploying stuff. And now I've started vibe
You're the
coding.
OG vibe coder.
I genuinely, yeah, like that's how I started. I never really was able to fully learn Solidity. Like I can read a contract and kind of understand the functions, and I know the basics, and I know how to implement things. But if like creating something from scratch is very, very hard. I don't have a traditional education in terms of
Right.
software development or anything like that. And so that's usually where my creative output comes. Like I'm entrepreneurial mindset. I'm like engineer mindset. I want to break things. I want to build things. And so for me, it's been on that side of like trying to create products and trying to create like a business and things like that. I did graffiti for a little while, so I'm like a little bit of a visual artist, but I like the digital mediums a lot more. So like
Nice.
I'm a weird guy in my head. Like my brain is just all over the place in terms of how I can be creative.
Well,
And that's
it's-
part of the reason why it's so hard to like be able to protect my creations, because I'm just all over the place. And
Right.
the way to protect like my graffiti drawings that I used to do, and the way to protect a potential app idea that I'm trying to build, or like lyrics that I'm trying to write for a song, because I think I can make a dope musician. Like all of those have different ways to be able to create them and put them out and actually protect my creations. And yeah, I mean, with Story, like it's just outside of the building an app and trying to protect that. Maybe I can protect my code somehow. But for the other creative outlets, I could really see a very easy path to using Story to be able to help protect the things that I'm creating and the ideas that I'm putting out there.
Take photos of all of your graffiti and register them on the portal as a first step.
I might. That's how I started on OpenSea. I wrote all the alphabets in my graffiti characters and like wrote a bunch of friends' names and tagged them out. And I was like, hey, you guys can just have these, like, I don't know. I wanted to protect it, but it was just putting it on chain for the sake of putting it on chain. Now I can actually see like, maybe I can build on these ideas because I know that they're actually going to be protected. And who knows if it does go viral or it gets some attention, then like I can worry about it when that happens, because I have this protocol to kind of help me do a lot of that legwork for me, and I can focus on just being creative and having fun and just throwing content out there, just for giggles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Genuinely, man, thank you so much. This was very enlightening. I hope we can have another edition of this at some point.
For sure. For sure. It was a pleasure to chat with you. Great questions, great hosting. Made me feel right at home. And feel free to give me some curveballs next time as well. Happy to try and hit those.
You know what? I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna prepare some like real like out of left field questions for you, and we're gonna have to run this back sometime. Maybe we can do an in-person interview next time.
Yes,
we'll meet up at a conference or something.
And just like this one, no prep allowed. For those of you who didn't know, this was supposed to be the prep meeting where we were just supposed to talk about what we were going to talk about, but instead we're like, let's just run it. Let's just go live right away.
Dive right in. And thank you for kicking that off. I'm glad that you said that, and I was like, you know what, let's do it. I might actually steal this idea and do it more often if we kick it off, very, very quickly and smoothly. But this was amazing. Genuinely, this is probably one of the best recordings I've had so far. No shade to any of my other guests, but I really like the fact that you were comfortable enough to do that. I appreciate it, dude. Thank you so much for your time. Before we hop off, if you can tell people where to find Story, where to find
Yeah.
you, and get involved.
Sure. So for the devs listening, definitely go to, docs.story.foundation. And that's where you can get started, tutorials, examples, references, APIs, etc. For those of you who are not devs, first stop is definitely, if you want to learn more about Story, you can go to learn.story.foundation, where we have like a learn hub that's aimed at non-technical people. And definitely check out the portal. So portal.story.foundation to start registering your first IP. And for like devs, if you want support, we have a Discord. So discord.gg/storybuilders. And my personal contacts, you can find me on Twitter at Devrelius. The name is Marcus Devrelius, and the handle is Devrelius.
Dude, I'm so embarrassed that I just put 2 and 2 together that you're Devrelius. Like you're actually kind of a legend, and I shouldn't have said anything. I should have just kept it in so I don't look like an idiot. But like I just connected that. That's awesome, dude. Thank you so much. Even the way you guys have your where to find things, so docs .story.foundation, learn.story.foundation, portal.story.foundation. Very easy to remember. I'm definitely going to dive into the portal after this.
Yes.
But again, man, thank you so much. Genuinely, this has been an amazing episode. I'm really excited to get this out there. And hopefully I will meet in real life soon and we can run this back.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. And thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Dude, thank you. I will talk to you later. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.